All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Jake Bartholomew. You might be familiar with me. I am hosting the Radical Philosophy Hour this month for February, and I am very pleased to be able to have in conversation Frances Negrón-Muntaner, who is a filmmaker, writer, scholar, Julian Clarence Levi Professor in the Humanities, and founding curator of the Latino Arts and Activisms Collection at Columbia University. Among her books and publications are Puerto Rican Jam, Boricua Pop, Puerto Ricans and the Latinization of American Culture, Sovereign Acts, Contesting Colonialism in Native Nations in Latinx America. She also has films. Her film and media works include Brincando el Charco, War for Guam, and Valor y Cambio, and Art, Digital Storytelling, and Just Economy Project in Puerto Rico and New York. Thank you so much for joining me, Francis.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, you'd have to be basically completely tapped out of culture to not have heard the name Bad Bunny, right? After it was announced he would be performing the Super Bowl, of course, the normal people who would get mad at such a thing did get mad at it. And of course, the Super Bowl just happened last Sunday. There have been takes and takes and takes. And we here at the Radical Philosophy Association decided ourselves, why not offer our own take? And so we're here in discussion with Frances to do that. Better person than her. So first of all, I guess, the question would be, we are intellectuals, we're high-minded, we do, all kinds of fancy stuff. Why deal with popular culture? And especially why Bad Bunny? Why Bad Bunny? So if you could answer that, that would be great.
Well, I think a lot of intellectuals have been interested in Bad Bunny in the Caribbean, certainly in Puerto Rico, the diaspora. And I think there's two main reasons. One is people see in Bad Bunny an intellectual,
Hmm.
someone that's making interventions that matter to how we think about the world. And that has to be placed in a longer history where the arts, popular culture in Puerto Rico and elsewhere in the region are very fundamental sites of knowledge production.
All right, all right. So, I know it should be obvious to everyone, but there are some people who are completely tapped out. So perhaps, for the sake of our viewers, we can ask this question: Who is Bad Bunny?
Well, Bad Bunny is different things to different people. To some, he's a voice of a generation articulating the challenges. And for other people, he's like vulgar, he can't sing. But for me, and the reason that I'm interested in him is that I started writing about popular culture and Latino diaspora since the 1990s. And to me, this is a moment that deserves attention for what it might be bringing in as rupture and in the ways that it also might have some continuities for the past.
All right. So, to the Super Bowl itself, obviously, the performance was, I mean, if you look all over it, everyone's talking about it, everyone's trying to analyze it. It went over very well. And so perhaps you could unpack, perhaps, because I think, people are trying to understand the symbolism and there's obvious stuff, the power, lines, or whatever, you know what I'm talking, right? So those are the obvious ones, but perhaps there's some more subtle ones that people might have missed that you might be able to sort of help explain a bit to us.
Well, first, I should say that the sheer attention that this performance has generated is remarkable. I mean, it's at a global scale. But why all the attention and why the response? Because there wasn't only a lot of attention prior to because of the people that objected to it and the grounds that they objected it to. But even as the performance was happening and the next day, there was an enormous volume of commentary. So part of it is I think Bad Bunny is very skilled at linking symbols and signs. And I think part of the attraction is that he packs his performance, particularly I've seen this trend accelerate since the Residencia in Puerto Rico. So it invites a lot of commentary because there are relations there that at the beginning you might say, why is this here, or how does it connect to that? And then if you see it a couple of times, you'll start seeing these connections emerge and to make a more meaningful picture. So what are some of those that caught my eye? Well, there was the initial cañaveral, the sugarcane plantation. At first look, it wasn't clear to me what he was trying to say with that, because this was a site of incredible oppression in the Caribbean and in all the plantation societies of the Americas. But on second and third view, you start seeing that people are talking to each other in the plantation, which suggests that maybe a seed of rebellion to come. And there's a few seconds there where you see the plantation worker, but then behind a little bit, you see what looks like a contemporary Latino, Mexican, or Central American worker in the fields.
Mm,
And by doing that, putting those two temporalities in one space, he was suggesting that there is a relationship between, uh, you know, U.S. Capital U.S. imperialism and the extraction of Latino labor then and now.
mm,
I was very interested in the ways that he punctuated in between sets or during a set, which was articulating or proposing a way of looking at certain things. And some of the most obvious, I would say, involves you mentioned the jibaros coming down from the poles, and that it reminds every Puerto Rican about the collapse of the grid after Hurricane Maria and the still challenges that exist due to the corruption that granted a contract to a company that didn't even have experience handling such matters to be in charge of rebuilding the grid. So there's continuous blackouts in Puerto Rico.
mm,
So that was a moment, let's say, in this ethno-national diorama where a contemporary problem is brought to the attention of millions of people. There's been a lot of commentary on the flag towards the end of the piece where he carries a Puerto Rican flag with a light blue color, and that might seem a detail of no importance to many people, but if you decode it, what it is suggesting that there has to be a process of taking back governance and power in Puerto Rico and take distance from the U.S. and particularly U.S. colonialism in Puerto Rico. And then at the end, which is what I've seen the most memes and the most videos online, has to do with his point that that the U.S. the United States residents citizens are not the only Americans. The U.S. is part of a larger constellation of countries that are part of the Americas. And he mentions most countries. He doesn't actually mention them all, and it's not clear if that's because of oversight or because of another criteria. For instance, he doesn't mention Belize, I believe.
mm,
But he does mention countries that are not Hispanophone, like Haiti,
mhm,
Guyana, and that's interesting because the response from the web is that a feeling of being seen, a feeling of being heard. And towards the end, he doubles down on the point, saying, all together we are America, and then the coda to it, we're still here.
mhm. Yeah. Fantastic. So yeah, yeah. So rife with symbols, and I guess the question is, so one of the things people are doing is not just reading the symbols, but reading them politically, right?
Hmm.
And suggesting that Bad Bunny is embodying some type of politics. And well, on the one hand, that seems reasonable. On the other hand, I mean, not to be, let's say, negative, but he is a musician. He is making money, right? He's performing in a place where, God knows how expensive the tickets are, right? So how, how do we parse that out, right?
Yeah, it's pretty complex, I would say. Because on the one hand, when you see the symbols, you can also say there's a level of nostalgia, there's a level of folklorization in some of them, which reminded me of my own critique of Lin-Manuel Miranda in The Heights because he did some of the same things. So why would people respond differently to Bad Bunny? I'll answer that question and then go to other parts. So
Mhm,
why would people respond differently when he's using some of the same strategies that other artists have been very criticized for? I think part of it is his extra performance, let's say. So there's the performance on the stage where he mobilizes the symbols, and he knows that there's some people out there that can decode them in a certain way. Well, there's other people that will decode them very differently. I would say most people that saw the Super Bowl, even those that love Bad Bunny, might not have gotten most of these codes. These were codes that were most legible to Puerto Ricans and Puerto Ricans that are in a particular political vein, I would say, as well, that are more receptive. Um, but we think about his extra performance outside of the arena. He's made some direct political interventions that make people see him in a particular light. So, for instance, in the last Puerto Rican elections, he took an active position in support of the La Alianza, which was a coalition between the Pro-Independence Party and a progressive party, which lost the elections but garnered about a third of the vote, which is substantial. There hadn't been such support for a pro-independence candidate for decades. He also paid for billboards that were directly criticizing the pro-statehood party. So if there's something clear about Bad Bunny's politics, is that he opposes statehood for Puerto Rico. And he's willing to put his money and his name and his presence into backing an alternative. Um, I think also of the time where it was his first appearance in a U.S. TV show in U.S. media. It was a Jimmy Fallon show, and he chose a song called "Estamos Bien." And before he sang the song, which would have been unintelligible for most people in present and in the U.S., he gave it a preface, and he said, Trump is still denying that there's over 3,000 people that have died as a result of Hurricane Maria. He was also a part of the performers, not only him, also Ricky Martin, Residente from Calle 13, Ile, and others, who actively used their platforms to mobilize people uh, in protest against the government of Ricardo Rosselló. So if you add his, extra stage political interventions with what he does on stage, I think it forms a coherent text.
Hmm.
At the same time, at the same time, it is hard to separate or impossible to separate what he does from the business model that supports it. And and that raises many more questions. So for instance, like when I was looking at the Super Bowl online, it starts with Apple. Apple presents it. You have the Apple logo. You go through the logo, and then at the end you say subscribe to Apple. So from Apple's point of view, that's probably an ad. Like Bad Bunny just did a 12-minute ad for Apple.
Very, very good. So, you mentioned his direct political interventions, and I think this is will be a useful pivot point for us to talk, because you mentioned the statehood movement, right? And a lot of people, I think, and we saw this, by the way, in the controversy, right? A lot of people don't know about Puerto Rico's relationship to the U.S., nor the history of that relationship. And I think it'd be useful for our viewers, for those who are unfamiliar with that, to understand a little bit more about the relationship between Puerto Rico and the U.S., if you could.
Yeah, the very basics and part of what Bad Bunny allows, if you look at the commentary, particularly from Puerto Rican intellectuals and others, but mostly from that sector, you see that it's an occasion to speak about colonialism. So you're doing it through a familiar referent. Bad Bunny becomes a familiar referent to bring up these other questions that most people in the U.S. are still unclear about. I've spoken to so many journalists during this period, and I explained the story, and they're educated people, that are interested, and they don't know most of it. So what is the basic? What's 101. It would be that the U.S. invaded Puerto Rico, among other places in the world in 1898 as part of the Spanish-American War, and established a new form of colonial rule there, which you could call territorial or incorporated territorial rule. And and that is still the law of the land. Through a series of Supreme Court cases, this idea that the U.S. can hold territories in perpetuity that belong to but are not part of the United States, which is one of the reasons when so many people try to defend Bad Bunny by saying, well, Puerto Rico is part of the U.S. Well, actually, technically, that's incorrect. Puerto Rico is according to the U.S., according to the legal regime in place, Puerto Rico belongs to the U.S., which is why Trump could fantasize about, well, we could sell Puerto Rico or exchange it for Greenland because it's a piece of real estate for us, which we can, whatever. And sovereignty in this arrangement, political sovereignty rests in Congress. Even the citizenship of Puerto Ricans was an act of Congress that could be eliminated by another act of Congress.
All right, fantastic. So that's very illuminating. Uh, uh, I think another factor, I think a political factor, and this is tied into Puerto Rico and its status, right, is this whole controversy over Spanish as a language, right? He sings in Spanish. He, in fact, I think only spoke Spanish in the performance, and this is one of the facets of the outrage. That they're performing in Spanish at the Super Bowl, America's big game, right? When, of course, Puerto Rico, as you said, is a territory where they are citizens speaking Spanish, right? And so. Uh, 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 I was wondering if you could say a few things about Spanish as a language, Spanish, the politics even of singing in Spanish.
Yeah, the Saturday Night Live prompt or dare that Bad Bunny shared with the audience, which was you have 4 months to speak Spanish. So there was already people upset that he was going to do the concert in Spanish. But then when he said that, it made more people outraged. And that's another occasion, another opportunity where we can think, well, what are the politics of Spanish for Latinos, for Puerto Ricans in the US? And that is a very long story. We can be here a very long time. But some of the highlights is that, Spanish is older than the United States being spoken in this territory. There was Spanish speakers on this territory before there was the United States and before English became the main language. And that speaks also to the colonial origin of Spanish in the Americas. But as Latinos, as the U.S. expanded into territory from Latin America, let's say Mexico in 1848 and Puerto Rico in 1898, it started to acquire territories with millions of Spanish speakers. So from the moment that the U.S. Is created, Spanish is here. From the moment that the U.S. expands territorially, it starts gobbling up, territories that have Spanish speakers. So from the beginning, the U.S. is a multilingual country.
Hmm.
And that's something that gets erased continuously by saying, no, this is an English speaking, actually, this is a multilingual country where millions of its citizens and residents speak Spanish to the point that the US is the second country in the world where most Spanish is spoken, ahead of Spain, which is number four. So if you think about it from that perspective, what Bad Bunny was saying was not outrageous in itself. But to the people that became outraged about it is that there is an erasure of this story, both the history of it and the present of it.
Very good. So
And
shifting to the
I shouldn't forget
oh yeah, okay.
one more thing that in Puerto Rico, there's also our own story around Spanish and English. When the U.S. invaded, initially they tried to make us English speakers, and there were moments of policy that were insane. Like, for instance, saying that teachers and students and everybody should speak English in the classroom when nobody spoke English. And eventually, that extreme policy that made no sense was eliminated. But still, to this day, in Puerto Rico, students need to take a class, una asignatura, in English to be able to go through the entire school system from first grade to the university. So in that sense, and because of the imposition of English, the artists and parts of the elite began to imagine their resistance to empire, to U.S. empire through language. And that's another subtext to Bad Bunny's intervention. Now, we could talk later about how that encases a certain idea about language that I don't think it's necessarily true, in the sense that, yes, Spanish is the native tongue of Puerto Ricans in Puerto Rico, but since there's more than 3 million Puerto Ricans living abroad, English actually has become very essential to us. And that's where Bad Bunny's message to me resonates different when he says it in Puerto Rico than when he says it in the US. When he is bringing up language politics in the US, we're talking about history of suppression, oppression, and also, let's face it, to this day, the Supreme Court says you can use Spanish to detain people and deport them. So Spanish has also been used historically to racialize and marginalize and make it difficult, if not impossible, for Spanish-speaking people or people that the state thinks are Spanish-speaking to have access to resources. Whereas in Puerto Rico, the defense of Spanish, not that there's no English spoken and that some people feel that's an encroachment that is also taking place because there's more settlers from the US going there. But in Puerto Rico, from the Puerto Rican point of view, there's also the fact that a lot of Puerto Ricans speak English as their native tongue. So there's the overt politics that I think most people got from his intervention, and then there's the more advanced, language politics that we can get into.
Perfect. Actually, so you mentioned, the difference between him performing in the U.S. and Puerto Rico, and the positions of Spanish. Uh, are are Bad Bunny's politics unique among Puerto Rican singers? Is he an outlier, or is he sort of in line with others?
No, I don't think he's an outlier. In fact, I always try to say that a lot of people look at Bad Bunny as a unique, experience or as unique figure. And if you look at the long durée, what you'll find is that there is a lengthy tradition of artists in various practices, being nationalist, supporting pro-independence. And in fact, the example that I gave earlier about the Rosselló protest, and there was Ricky Martin was present, and there was Residente, and there was other artists that were present. And in that regard, he's not an outlier. I think he's part of a tradition that sees the arts and practice the arts as a way to safeguard, the possibility of nationality and the reproduction of the nation culturally, given that there's no other means through state. The state is sometimes a partner, but it is not invested in a nation building project with its own state. So cultural production often takes that space. And in that sense, he's not unique. I think he's the most visible, perhaps, version of it right now.
All right, fantastic. Maybe to the broader context then. So this isn't the first time Latinos have performed at the Super Bowl, is it?
Nope.
Right. So, wait, who was it that performed before? I forget.
Well, actually, the Latinos have been performing at the Super Bowl since the early 1990s. Gloria Estefan has been on that stage several times, and she was the first one. But actually, I got interested in the Super Bowl halftime in 2020 when Shakira and Jennifer Lopez became the first two Latinas to headline the Super Bowl. So when the announcement of Bad Bunny came, I was interested in how does that compare? How is it different? And in some ways it was different. I think the scale of controversy was different. The projection that this particular artist had was greater. And that he did the whole halftime was in Spanish was also different. However, there were some continuities. There were Spanish in the earlier one. There was also a lot of criticisms from MAGA and Trump. And in fact, that show was the show in NFL history that had the highest number of complaints by viewers up to that point. And the complaints were the same because also Trump was president in that moment. So though what was seated there is now at a different scale, it was already there. And the arguments were the same. It's not family entertainment. They're sexual movements. They're not patriotic. They're not Americans. And actually, Jennifer Lopez in her section very overtly criticized Trump and the policy of putting children and other people in cages. Right. So that was part of the show. So yeah, no. So in that sense, you could say that Bad Bunny, his opportunity to perform at the Super Bowl is many decades in the making from the point of view of the NFL decision making.
Mm. Well, speaking of the NFL decision making, I mean, we do have to ask, why do you think the NFL chose Bad Bunny? I mean, maybe, as you said, the complaints, right? Maybe the controversy is the point, right? To get eyes on it. But I mean, this is a conscious choice, and as you said, this is, a major sort of event in the making, right? Why do you think they picked Bad Bunny out of all people?
Well, I happened to be in Madrid the last few months, and I saw and I followed and I saw on the streets people dressed with jerseys like for their favorite teams, NFL teams, because there was a game that was played there. And connected to other readings and other conversations I've had around about the NFL and where it's going, I think the main reason that Bad Bunny was picked, it was because the NFL knows he's the number one global star in the world. And the NFL knows that in order for this franchise to keep making money and expand its consumers and fans, they and survive into the future, they need to also expand their footprint in the rest of the world. There has to be football played not only in the United States, and there has to be fans of U.S. football elsewhere outside of the United States. I think that was the number one reason that Bad Bunny was selected to cultivate that global audience. Um, and then it might also be the case that they wanted to signal, other things, but I think that's the bottom line.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Yeah, you definitely do see that growing. So maybe we can move on to the controversy, perhaps. Because of course that's that's what's got us talking about it. That's what's even got us here discussing it. Um, why? Well, I mean, obviously we all have our theories about it, but you're the guest here. Why do you think Bad Bunny makes people and specific types of people, right, the MAGA types, so angry, right? Why is they so upset?
I think there's a lot of there's a number of reasons. I mean, for some people, he is doesn't embody America. America being the United States, and in a way, the halftime for them is a kind of sacred space where American, understood as white, middle class, middle America. Hey, that's their stage for that, and that belongs to them. So when you have people that take that stage that don't fit that idea of what an American is or should be, or is the quintessential type, some people feel threatened by that. And Bad Bunny is also kind of the repressed colony coming back to haunt you. His presence, his very presence on that stage suggests that the United States is not what it seems to be, that it's not a democracy, that actually an empire. And he also reminds you that there's these, hundreds of year history of empire and of Latino and African descended people presence in this country that is not your. So I think his presence just contradicts a lot of people's narratives of who they are, what the United States is. Um, and I think for other people, it's just must be incredibly annoying that a person that they don't consider to be American or up to their level in racially and otherwise has the status that he has. I mean, he has more followers on Instagram than Trump, for instance. It must be like, everything that you think is inferior and threatening and usurping your space is taking center stage.
Mm, very good, very good. So I wanted to then shift to, let me see what else I had. Well, obviously, I mean one of the contexts that we can also talk about, of course, is the deportation machine that they're running, right? And how this, in fact, also ties into sort of Bad Bunny's appearing at the Super Bowl like that, right? I mean, famously, I think at the Grammys he had some pretty choice words for ICE, right?
Right.
And so I think thinking through perhaps this moment of linking those together, if you could speak a little on that.
Well, one of the complaints, or one of the things that bothers some people about him is actually that he's so anti-America, anti-Trump, and anti-ICE. I mean, like, so the fact that he in the Grammy speech, the first thing he says, or one of the first things he says is "ICE out."
Mm,
Consolidates that. So on top of all that he represents culturally. And the defiance that he might represent to certain narratives. He's also taking a position about what is happening right now and rejecting it. And since he has such a platform, This is consequential in the sense that if Bad Bunny says it, or if someone that has that many followers believes that, then it might make other people believe that, you know? So yeah, so he also represents an anti-Trump, anti-MAGA agenda. Also, let's remember that he supported Kamala Harris in the 2024 elections. So there's these like large, aspects to what he's presenting that challenge people, but there's also an immediacy to his presence that challenges people.
So, beyond Bad Bunny, beyond the controversy, I think there's something to be said about again about the question of sort of s- the need to, I think, and I think many of us seem to see this more and more, to sort of address pop culture intellectually, right? And I think because you might look at a group like us, for example, having you talking about Bad Bunny and say, well, what's the use in that, right? But I think there is something valuable there, and I think if you could say a few words about that, right? The sort of importance of analyzing popular culture, perhaps even especially as it ties into Latinos in the United States.
Well, when you look at the debate, there seems to be two positions. It's like uh, entertainment is, not important because it's commercial, it's commodifiable, it's commodified culture. And then the other one is actually this is where the revolution is going to come. So I take another route. I think popular culture is important in general because it's a space where signs are rearranged,
Hmm.
where subjectivities can be transformed in certain ways. And I think, for instance, in Puerto Rico, I think Bad Bunny's project, the pedagogical project, also included a subjective reorientation that people become more aware of their history in order for them to acquire a different sense of value. And this was actually also in the Super Bowl. There are a number of moments in the halftime where he tells people, direct address, you're more valuable than you think. And those are, to me, interventions in the transformation of subjectivity, like that people think of themselves in a different way and therefore act in a different way. So I think that's in general. But in the case of Latinos, including Puerto Ricans in the US, it's often been the case that popular culture figures are one of the few things that we might share with the rest of the people that live in this country. So, for instance, I've been writing about popular culture since the 1990s. And I do it, and I did it, and I continue to do it in part precisely because it gets us to this conversation. If I was writing about something else, we probably would not be talking right now. So, in that sense, I think it's like, from a general sense, the popular culture is a space where things change. Not all things, certainly, and we can't expect certain structural change to happen in society from a performance. But you can expect that something moves during the performance for some people that open up possibilities that may not have been there before or that they hadn't been aware of before. And that includes everything from what is said, what is seen, but also how you feel and the kind of community that it creates. So, in that sense, I feel that in general we should pay attention. And in the case of Latinos, it has been an outsized part of our scholarship and our politics, the cultural arena, because sometimes we don't have other arenas, and because it's the most shareable arena that we have.
It's
Now, that
weird.
of course has limits. That has limits. But yeah, it's nevertheless relevant.
And I guess this gets me back to Bad Bunny because then, like, yes, you have this sort of every man. Yes, it gives us messages and things that we can identify with, but the man is not doing so bad, right? And he's selling merch, and I think there's still that sort of bugbear, which we can call, of course, capitalism in the music industry, that still feels strange to me, right? Even if we're talking about the sort of radical effects of his music, there's still that factor, isn't there?
Separate. Yeah, I think we have to. That's why analysis. We need analysis. We need to sort out, separate, and look at the contradictions and tensions that what might have. So, for instance, in my work on La Residencia, I saw this very acutely because, in part, the interventions, the world, that Puerto Rico had a lot of talent, that Puerto Rico could have a different place in the global economy. And there were contradictions in it. That was, for instance, a critique of mass tourism, a critique of this type of industry, yet the Residencia itself was a mass tourism, event. Um, so in that sense, you can see that there's some limits where capital or capitalism in that context wasn't really addressed as a political matter. What was addressed is who is in control of the machine, right? Who's in control of the hotels? What is the reason that the tourists come? But the larger model wasn't so much critique or addressed. There wasn't an alternative really that was provided. And that to me opens more, it's complicated, opens more questions because for, someone driving an Uber or for someone having a restaurant, the number of tourists can be a welcome, more tourists the better for their livelihood. But on the other hand, as a model, it's clearly not what most people would like to see. So in that context, I saw very clearly some of the tensions and contradictions. Also, the tickets were very, very expensive. Some people went into debt to go to these concerts. There was a number of partnerships that Bad Bunny created with major retailers and companies like Adidas. And also, there's a certain tendency to create these iconic, either dress, the pava, or merchandise that says Bad Bunny or what have you, and in some ways narrow what we understand by Puerto Rican culture. So certainly, no doubt that the proposition is complicated because Bad Bunny, Benito is a person, but Bad Bunny is a commodity. And part of what's happening is that he's trying to expand what that commodity can do in some ways, but still bound by that structure. And in that sense, yes, we have to ask these questions. Now, on the other hand, if you look at the reception, then you see a lot more layers to what people see, how it makes them feel, what they emphasize, that might not be in the intent of the commodity, either as an artist or the larger structure that promotes the artist, So in that sense, I feel like, we just need to, take it all in and break it down, and not fall into this is the savior or this is the devil or what have you. I think it's a very complex phenomenon.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, uh, 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 thinking then, right? We talked about Spanish, and you mentioned, right? Spanish is the United States is, I think, the second largest Spanish-speaking population. What do you think? Because this is a major moment, obviously, for Latinos and for Puerto Ricans specifically. But perhaps we can start asking about Latinos in general, and then Puerto Rico specifically. What do you think this portends? What does this mean something? Does this signal a shift in the role of Latinos in society, or is this just another thing happening?
That's what we don't know. Or that's what I don't know. Like a part of, I read a lot of things that represent this moment as a fundamental structural shift in the presence of Latinos in the world, in the agency of Latinos, or maybe the future of Puerto Rico's future. It's not that clear to me because my own work on popular culture tells me that we've had moments that felt like this in the past. When La Gasolina or Despacito, which were also hits in Spanish that were being played everywhere every few seconds in the world, we get a sense of what that could be. But then it doesn't necessarily continue to build, and then there's goes back to business as usual to some extent. Now, what are signs that this could be different? Well, from an industry point of view, a sign that this could be different is that the stable is full. That is, there's a lot of Latino performers in Spanish that have become global icons. Maybe not as big as Bad Bunny is right this second, but there's a lot more people. So Bad Bunny getting access to the status is also connected to the fact that there's a lot of more people there. Like he's not walking into the room where nothing is happening. He's walking into a room where a lot is happening, and that there's been a shift, apparently, in the reception of Spanish language artists in the world. Now, is that going to be part of what colleague Brian Herrera calls Latin numbers that we're going to forget, and then it's going to come back again, and we're going to say, "Oh yes, Latin music again." We're not sure. I'm not sure yet. Um, and I wouldn't correlate what happens also on the stage with what happens in society and politics more broadly, because they are also autonomous
Mhm.
spaces. The fact that you might have Bad Bunny in the Super Bowl does not mean that, that in fact doesn't mean it right now. That Latinos have been able to cohere a certain power in society to detain what's happening, for instance.
Mhm. Yeah,
Uh,
and
but it does offer the possibility. So that's why it's like it's an open question. To me, like Bad Bunny's a breaking story still.
yeah, it's a breaking story still. So you know, still though, people are making a whole lot of hay of him representing something politically, whether it's even like a decolonial moment or something like that, right? And what is he, right? Is he a poet? Is he just a musician, right? What do you think?
Well, yeah, I think he's a poet. I mean, actually, we didn't talk about that. I mean, as with all poets, some people may not like the poetry, but that's different whether he's a poet, right? And by that I mean that he's definitely crafting language, and there's some characteristics to his language. A number of years ago, I was asked, and way before Bad Bunny, I was like, what had been the most important literary event in Puerto Rico, of the 20th century? And my answer was immediate, and it was reggaeton. So Bad Bunny kind of is now confirming that in a bigger scale. And but what I mean is that certainly Puerto Rico has great writers, poets, but they don't have the audience that he does. And when you look at his lyrics, there's certain characteristics about them that I think could be that are poetic in the sense that there's an economy to them. I think one of the reasons that so many Anglophone and speakers of other language can consume Bad Bunny because his ideas are very compact. The main idea is very compact. So, for instance, something like Yo Perreo Sola. You don't have to necessarily understand the rest of it to get that has something to do with women's autonomy. I twerk by myself, and you should respect that and leave me alone, right? Um, or lo que le pasó a Hawaii, what happened to Hawaii, immediately kind of poses a question. Um, so no, I think he has at his best, I think he has one characteristic, which is he's able to grasp something and distill it in a very succinct way. And if you add that we're living in an age where people have access to the internet and can translate the rest or the title, then you get a level of consumption of that poetics. So he's an artist, he is a poet, he's also a commodity, and he's also a political actor in the sense that not only with his music, which you could say it's a way of moving the signs around to create a different or a new or a desired reality, but he's also made so far incursions into the political arena directly. So he's all of that, and there's tensions and contradictions in that, but there's also a certain consistency to what he represents. At the same time, as it should be, what he represents is a subject also of debate. People see different things. So, for instance, if you are someone that's critical of nationalism, then you are going to be less receptive to thinking that he is the epitome of where we should go politically than if you are. So the debate continues in that sense. He doesn't settle it by any means.
Among other things, I think I don't know if we pointed this out. He's American. He has
Is he?
American citizenship, right? And I
Right,
think this is something if you could sort of because we talked about the status of Puerto Rico. What about the status of Puerto Ricans, right? Because I,
right,
I, I think this is something that the joke was always that they were saying send ICE to deport Bad Bunny to what back to
right,
America.
right. So, when he went on the Grammy stage the second time and he said, "We are Americans," I paused because I thought, does he mean, is he saying we're Americans as, residents or citizens of the United States? Or does he mean American in a hemispheric way? And he answered that in the the Super Bowl halftime, right? But there was a question there. I think the short answer is from the point of view of nationality, Bad Bunny would say he's not an American, as most Puerto Ricans in the archipelago would say we are not Americans. Because being a national of Puerto Rico or identifying our nationality as Puerto Rican has to do with an imagining of us as a people that doesn't depend on whether we have U.S. citizenship or we have an independent state. And in the case of Puerto Rico, that process is very much mediated by culture, and that's why culture is so central. Because it in the cultural practices and the memory that's passed on through cultural oral history and other practices that we maintain that sense, that story, that we are a people with a shared past, a present, and a desired future, right? But because of an act of Congress, a law that was passed, then we are also U.S. citizens. And some people would say that that was an imposition, that nobody wanted it. And some people would say that's not true, that actually a lot of people did want it. But regardless of whether people wanted it or not, which was a debate at the time, the fact legally from the U.S. point of view, which has the most power in this relationship, Puerto Ricans are American citizens. And this is interesting, the kind of U.S. citizenship that was invented for Puerto Ricans and eventually to be shared with other territorial citizens was a different kind of U.S. citizens. So the unincorporated territory doctrine that determines Puerto Rico belongs to but is not part is complemented by this idea of citizenship that is attached to place rather than to people. And this was a kind of colonial innovation of the United States. So when you live in the territory, you are a U.S. citizen, but you don't have the same rights as other U.S. citizens that live on any of the states. Now, when your body moves from the territory to any of the states, on paper at least, you acquire all citizenship rights, which include voting for president, voting for elected representatives, and those are not rights that people in the archipelago have. So, bottom line, nationality, citizenship, are two different things.
Mhm.
So you can hold in one person the fact that you have a citizenship of empire and a nationality crafted, in a different space using different criteria than the law.
Very interesting. I'm sure many of our viewers aren't familiar with that fact, actually.
But
Um,
actually, let me just extend it that it's not only Puerto Ricans.
mhm.
There are more national and ethnic groups. So that is groups of people that think of themselves as ethnic groups or parts of nations that don't have states or parts of nationalities. Then there are nation states. So think about Spain for a moment. It has multiple national groups or only one state. As Catalans, as Basques, Andalusians, Valencians, etc. And that is not only true of Spain, it's also true of the United States. The United States has native nations within the territory that the U.S. state claims and controls, at least to an extent. So in that sense, the U.S. is not only a multilingual or quote unquote multicultural nation or state, it's also a multinational state. So there's a state and there's multiple groups that imagine themselves as a nation and carry their lives and their policies in that way, still in this territory.
Hmm. Interesting. Speaking of nationalism, then maybe, I mean, you know, you mentioned the sort of nationalist, uh, how'd you put it, like a sort of nationalist diorama that was,
Right.
that the thing was, and you mentioned a few things, but you know, uh, I think you mentioned the flag, for example, the symbolism of the flag. You mentioned the sugar cane. What other sort of little nationalist symbols did you read in there?
Well, I mean the recuperation of the jibaro, the peasant, and the pava hat that he wore, that a lot of the people on the set wore, and that he wore through the residencia. That's also a nationalist trope, or has been, in the sense that it is the image of the quintessential, the essence of Puerto Ricans as a national group. Um, so that's another element that was very present there. I mean, I would say the whole, I mean, in his music videos, not only in the halftime, but in his music videos, for instance, Nueva York, in that song that was included in the halftime, um, there's early on he gets it's very cold and there's a car in the visuals and he gets into the car and say, when is this cold going to end? You know? And I guess the you can read that metaphorically to mean, when is colonialism going to end? When is forced migration going to end? And there's another part in that song where he says, "I'm here for a little bit, so I'm visiting New York for a little bit." And in his finale at the halftime, connecting that, where he brings out all the flags, including the Puerto Rican flag, I think that's another nationalist moment where he is placing Puerto Rico, who is an unincorporated, so legally from the U.S. point of view and from the point of view of the world system, is a property of the United States. He's elevating in that dance in that march. He's elevating the Puerto Rican flag at the same level as the other nation states of the hemisphere. So that's another basic nationalist moment. And in fact, you could say that in the halftime, he looks at the U.S. from a national point of view, from a Puerto Rican national point of view.
Mm.
So although he both in some songs, the halftime, some of the music videos, he recognizes the importance of the diaspora. He recognizes the importance of Latinos in the U.S. and wants to value that. At the same time, his point of view is not that of a U.S. Latino. It's not a diasporic Latin Puerto Rican. His point of view remains very, very anchored in a perspective of Puerto Rico as a different and separate nation.
Fantastic, fantastic. It's very illuminating. So, um, maybe we can sort of wrap up with a thought, right? Okay, so it happened. We're talking about it. We'll probably keep talking about it for at least another few months, and people will still stay angry about it. Although I've seen, I think it was Jake Paul who lives in Puerto Rico walk back his dislike of Bad Bunny online. Um, but so, what do you think the legacy of this will be? Do you think, is it like I know you said I'm still thinking it. We are still in that
Yeah.
moment, right? But if you could, you
I
know.
mean, there's some basic rubrics perhaps that we can count on being there for a little bit. The first halftime in Spanish, in the context where there's a presidency with adopted a set of policies that are ethnic cleansing of Latinos in the United States. It's like physical removal of the people that speak Spanish or presumably speak Spanish, and what that represents culturally, racially, and otherwise. It's going to be remembered as a political moment, regardless of what we see in the performance or not, because larger forces in society made it so. And I think it also signifies, although there's debate how many people viewed the Super Bowl versus how many people viewed the halftime. I mean, the millions of people that actually did not care about football at all, are also indicative that sacred space, or that investment in football as the quintessential sport of American life might also be in decline, or at least not as central as it used to be, right? So I think there's some things that we can identify and recognize that will likely, made some degree of rupture. What's less clear to me is whether it led us or is part of or made a big contribution to a different political reality for Latinos in the U.S. and in Puerto Rico. That is yet to be seen. And I think there's been a lot of commentary and a lot of analysis immediately to the events, and I think we also need a little time to process and to notice maybe things that are being overlooked at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think everyone was so, excited or mad that, stepping back, we will see what this all led to. Well, um, I
And
think
by the
that.
way, we won't have the same narrative about it.
Oh no, no, exactly.
We will have very different takes about what it meant or didn't mean, or did he even should have gone there. That there's people that also have argued that he should not even have accepted to be on that stage, given what the history of the NFL what the game is about, and so forth. So I think we will be, debating this for a little bit, and maybe there's a juncture where it doesn't become as important as we feel it is now,
Mhm.
and something else, changes its significance. So we'll see.
We'll see. Well, okay, perfect. This has been the Radical Philosophy Hour. I thank you so much again for coming on, Francis. It was a pleasure. I hope our viewers get a lot out of this, and we will see you soon in another month.